Thank you. And thank you, Senator, for coming and testifying in front of your old committee.
How do you like it, Chick?
What's that?
How do you like it? It's not bad, right?
I like this. I like working with these guys. I'm going to ask you some hard questions, though, to give you a hard time. But we do important work here. And as the good chair was stating, there was an issue with the pursuit policy and taking into consideration the general public's safety and well-being when these pursuits are happening. When this first came out, I'm like, this is crazy. We really need to be able to pursue and chase. And I had a couple of great conversations with chiefs of police and officers, supervisors that said sometimes, it's not the best thing because, it could be in the middle of the night or it could be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and school's getting out, there's kids walking and there's the possibility of additional unintended consequences or more danger to the general public. So I was kind of back and forth. And as we've seen this law be in place and the lack of pursuits that are happening, we're seeing more individuals running from the police. Talking to some of my local police departments, not only are they running when, it's a stolen vehicle or somebody stole something from a hardware store and they take off and they're running, individuals are literally taking off as it's just a regular traffic stop. Some of the officers told me, or departments, that they have another call signal to keep track of it. So if somebody's in the commission of a crime and they run, that's one signal that they'll call so they can keep track of it. And there's another one just for a general traffic stop, and people just aren't stopping. And I think this is important that we look at this now and we try to find a happy medium, because the individuals that are continuously just running and evading these police officers kind of know there isn't a consequence. And I think that, as you stated, we don't get it right the first time all the time. We passed this, we saw what was going on, and now we see individuals just simply not stopping. We're almost emboldening them to do that. We talked to some of the chiefs of police when we were talking about the street takeovers and how they're just taking off constantly. So I do think that this is extremely important that we keep this conversation going and we make sure we give these resources to the officers and they can make the determination whether or not it's safe to do so. And again, it could be called off at any time, from my understanding. So if we realize, even if there's no one on the road, but the individuals that are running are just, maybe driving erratically or extremely dangerous, that they can say, okay, this isn't worth it for the safety of the officers, the individuals actually fleeing, or the general public that may be in the area. But I do think it's an important conversation to be had, because I am hearing from the rank and file that it's happening way too often. And individuals know that they're not going to be pursued. They just throw a different plate on a vehicle, and there's going to be no way to hold them accountable. Other conversations were brought up that if the officers, maybe could figure out who they are and then go arrest them after the fact, whether they ID them through, camera footage, specifically with street takeovers, people are recording those. They go back and they would make it an increased penalty for someone who ran from the officer. Whether that's going to be the solution, or we look at this and let it be known that you might not be able to get away with running. And if you're you will be pursued, you will be caught, and there'll be consequences. And we've seen that when there are certain consequences or changes in legislation, there could be a very positive outcome for public safety. We passed a bill last year that talks about the increased bond amount, cash bond, on certain violent gun crimes, and we've seen that murders went down. So when we apply common sense to the legislation that we have that's been here for years or even recently created, that with those tweaks, positive outcomes could happen. And with that comment, would you see that us, analyzing and possibly reforming some of our pursuit policies could have that effect?
Yes. Yeah, I think you summarized it well. I think that there are these are, in my opinion, are common sense measures that can go a long way towards addressing crime and maybe creating some deterrences for individuals to either run or for just to commit the crime in general, which is always what we want. So yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. And then just one more on Section 6, we talked about the manufacturing and sale of certain drugs, and we've seen the overdoses are just happening at an alarming rate, and they're cut with fentanyl. And I just had 2 funerals within 3 weeks in my local town from bad drugs. Yeah. And it's terrible that our families are in our districts are having to experience this terrible loss. and in my opinion, this could be a way to deter that. But one of the other areas, it talks about crimes against minors, so trafficking of minors, and it's not just the drugs, it's also, people that are victimizing children. And just in the last public hearing, we were talking about certain types of child pornography that are out there, that there may be a little bit of a loophole for individuals to not be held accountable if it's made with AI. And I just wanted to point out that in Section 6, it also does that, and this is a way to help protect our children. I didn't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, no,
at all.
Senator, I'm very happy you mentioned it because it was an important component to this proposal that unfortunately I forgot to mention in the beginning of my testimony, because fentanyl is such a huge aspect of it. As you mentioned, Senator, in your district alone, you attended 2 funerals of individuals that unfortunately lost their lives to an overdose. It is crippling some of our communities, and I think this would go a long way towards really helping apprehend and deter the individuals that are selling this narcotic on the streets and unfortunately killing some of our youth. But you mentioned a really important point of the proposal as well, which is helping address human trafficking and sex crimes, particularly against minors. And you read some of the lists of these crimes that are included in this. It was actually astonishing to think that these crimes are not 85% bids to begin with. The fact that we're not making some of these individuals convicted of these terrible, heinous crimes, particularly against children, to serve at least 85% of their sentence before they're eligible for parole. I think it's a common sense measure to highlight these crimes as significant and particularly reprehensible crimes, which they are. And so I'm happy that you allowed me the opportunity to mention those, because that is an important part of our proposal as well.
Absolutely. And thank you. Thank you to the good chair for allowing me the time.
Thank you. Further questions or comments?